Ancient Rome awakens slowly, embraced by the first rays of sunlight, illuminating the columns of its temples and the walls of its imposing villas. The air is filled with a mix of scents: freshly baked bread from the bakeries, coal smoke from the blacksmiths' workshops, and the perfume of herbs sold by morning merchants in the forum. While the invisible clocks of Roman society signal the start of a new day, the streets fill with merchants, slaves, artisans, and nobles, each heading to their own duties. The rhythmic sound of hammers and the squeaking of wheels on the cobblestones catch the eye from afar. Thus begins our story. A day in the life of a Vestiarius, a craftsman specialized in creating, maintaining, and dyeing garments. To some, he might appear to be a simple tailor, but in the reality of ancient Rome, the Vestiarius is much more. He stands at the intersection of fashion, social status, and technical innovation. Clothing is not merely a practical item, it is an expression of Roman power, belonging, and identity. Today we will follow this craftsman step by step, from the first moments of morning until the time he extinguishes his oil lamp before sleeping. With each passing moment, we will feel the pulse of Rome, see how the art of fabrics and dyeing intertwines with social demands, and understand the fundamental importance of such a profession in the complex hierarchy of the eternal city. Let us set out and allow ourselves to be carried along by the sound of scissors, by the strong scent of pigments, and by the thrill of a world that has left its mark over the centuries. It is before the sun fully rises when Lucius Vestiarius, our protagonist, wakes. Custom demands he rise at first light, for his workshop requires careful preparations. In his simple chamber, the walls are decorated only with a few colored cloths, examples of his work, but also a sign of professional pride. Next to the bed stands a small altar dedicated to the god Laris, protector of the home, before which he utters a few words of gratitude and prayer. In Rome, every craftsman has a bond with the divine. Trades are considered gifts from the gods, and the continuity of success often depends on the respect offered to these protective spirits. Still drowsy, Lucius stretches out toward a small clay amphora filled with water, which he uses to wash his face. This morning purification ritual symbolizes the start of a new day and prepares him for contact with the dye substances. Once clean, he briefly checks the condition of his skin and nails. Working with pigments and chemical substances used in dyeing can cause irritations, so a Vestiarius must always be sure he is in good physical shape. On the table awaits a light snack, unleavened bread and perhaps a few olives, set out especially by his wife the previous evening. Lucius's family, his wife and a 6-year-old child, still sleeps, and he prefers not to make noise. After dressing in a simple tunic, which he reserves specifically for workshop tasks, Lucius puts on his leather sandals and slips into the courtyard to check the condition of the vessels and tools used for soaking fabrics and fixing colors. The first hour of the morning is devoted to a quick inspection. The dye left to macerate overnight, the pigments obtained from plants and insects. All must be ready and properly mixed. As the sun rises higher, Lucius leaves the courtyard of his home and steps onto the narrow street leading to his workshop. The city stirs to life. Slaves hurry to buy fresh fruits and vegetables for the households of patricians. Cart drivers labor to pull wagons of grain, and soldiers of the cohort march in formation toward the city gates. The sound of horses, the clatter of sandals, and the calls of merchants create an intense soundscape, typical of a metropolis that never sleeps. Lucius's workshop is not far. It is located in a district of numerous commercial spaces, along a street where each shop offers something distinct. One sells oils and perfumes, another handles metalwork, while yet another fabric merchant imports fine materials from Egypt and the East. Lucius greets his neighbors with a glance and arrives before a heavy wooden door, which he unlocks carefully. Here, inside, lies his world. Long tables holding rolls of cloth and wool, clay vessels filled with dyes of various shades, and a small furnace where the more demanding pigments are heated. Each time he enters the workshop, a palpable excitement takes hold of him. He must complete a few important orders. One for a senator who wants a spotless white toga, another for a wealthy matron who has requested a gown in shades of violet, a symbol of royalty and privilege. In Rome, the color violet is often associated with high status, and Tyrian purple, a rare and very costly pigment extracted from marine shells, is sought after by the political and commercial elite. These elements belong to the dress hierarchy of Rome, and Lucius, as a Vestiarius, plays a major role in maintaining the image and prestige of his clients. To truly understand Lucius's routine, it is essential to know the tools and techniques he uses. On a long table lie several items. Large iron shears, carefully sharpened, essential for cutting fabrics. Bronze and bone needles, used in sewing and embroidery. Wooden combs, needed for smoothing fibers. Clay and metal vessels for boiling water and pigments. Small knives and spatulas for mixing and spreading dye. Before anything else, Lucius checks the thickness and quality of the material to be processed. Wool and linen are the most commonly used fibers in Rome. Silk exists, but it is extremely expensive and usually arrives from the East, reserved only for the very wealthy. For the senator's order, it is a toga that must look impeccable at a public speech. Thus, Lucius looks for a dense yet fine material that will drape elegantly over the wearer's shoulders. After choosing the cloth, he begins the measuring and cutting phase. In general, Roman togas and gowns are less fitted to the body than modern clothing, but there is still a science to draping that requires great skill. Lucius prepares the edge of the cloth, making precise cuts. Then comes the time for dyeing or bleaching, depending on the situation. For white fabric, slightly alkaline substances and a repeated washing process are used, sometimes even sun exposure to maintain that pure brightness. On the other hand, for the wealthy matron's order, a purple pigment is needed. Here, the secret of the trade comes into play. Purple dye can be obtained from various sources, the most famous being Tyrian purple, extracted from the shells of Melanchthonus, which yields an intense and durable hue. In one corner of the workshop, a metal vessel is already heating this valuable extract. Lucius must carefully measure the concentration and temperature, otherwise the result can be distorted, too reddish or too dark. In Roman society, a Vestiarius's importance is not limited to practical matters. Social class was extremely visible through clothing. Senators wore broad purple stripes on their togas, latus clavus. Knights, narrower stripes, angustus clavus, while ordinary Roman citizens had simple togas. Noble women displayed their wealth through fine fabrics and rich embroidery. Thus, a skilled tailor and dyer is the guarantor of public image. A senator wearing a poorly cut or poorly dyed toga would be a disaster for his prestige, and a Vestiarius who makes mistakes risks losing valuable clients as well as the respect of his guild. According to Roman laws, There were restrictions on who could wear certain colors or types of fabric, especially purple, mostly reserved for the elites. There were also artisan associations, a kind of collegia, guilds, where craftsmen organized themselves, protected their interests, and set professional standards. Lucius himself is a member of such a collegium, and these colleagues meet regularly to discuss pricing, fiber quality, and the laws that affect their activity. After preparing the materials and dyes, Lucius begins the actual dyeing process. In a large vessel, he heats water and gradually adds the pigments. The fabric must be submerged at controlled temperatures, then removed and rinsed repeatedly. Once the desired shade is reached, it is left to dry, preferably in the shade, so it does not fade in the strong sunlight. Throughout this time, Lucius pays close attention to how the material reacts, and his hands become lightly stained by pigments. Several washes are often required, but this is part of the daily sacrifice of a Vestiarius. By the time the sun reaches its peak, the workshop begins receiving its first clients or their representatives, slaves sent with instructions and new orders. A young woman, servant to a patrician family, arrives with a roll of fine linen, requesting a summer mantle for her mistress. Then, a young military interpreter inquires about repairing a woolen cloak used on journeys and missions outside the city. Lucius greets them with a smile and politeness, noting the specifications, measurements, colors, delivery dates. Only after gathering this information can he estimate the price and the length of the work. Around midday, Lucius takes a break for lunch. He leaves his apprentice, a 14-year-old boy learning the secrets of the trade, to watch over the dyes while he goes out to eat. In Rome, it is quite common to buy food from nearby stalls: hot soup, lentils, fresh bread, and cheese. Sitting on a wooden stool at the edge of the road, Lucius exchanges a few words with a neighboring blacksmith and a slave carrying sacks of grain. The usual topics: grain prices, rumors of a possible military campaign, and of course, the Senate's latest decision regarding taxes on artisans. Although it seems like a short and simple break, these discussions are essential for keeping up to date with city life and socio-political changes. Lucius knows that high taxes on rare dyes can affect him directly, and a possible military campaign might create new demands for uniforms or cloaks for soldiers. Everything is interconnected in Rome, and the Vestiarius' trade, although it may seem isolated within the workshop walls, depends on the empire's economic and political currents. After the brief pause, Lucius returns to the workshop with renewed energy. It is the perfect time to focus on details, finishing hems, fine embroidery for those who can afford it, adjusting tunic sleeves to fit perfectly at the shoulders. The work sometimes becomes painstaking, and the sunlight streaming through the wide windows helps him see every stitch. Suddenly, a maid of the matron who ordered the purple gown knocks on the door and announces that her mistress would like to move the delivery forward by 2 days. She has an important banquet and wishes to shine in the new garment. For Lucius, this is a challenge. Speeding up the dyeing and drying process risks producing an uneven shade or insufficient color fix. Still, wealthy and influential clients must be heeded, so he will have to work late to fulfill the request. He quickly thinks of possible technical solutions, maybe a warm air drying method that will not damage the fiber. On the other hand, a servant of the senator arrives, wanting to check on the progress of the white toga. In a society driven by reputation, senators are extremely attentive to public appearances. Lucius assures him that everything is going according to plan and promises to meet the deadline. He clenches his teeth, aware that he must complete two major projects within very tight time frames. Outside the workshop, Lucius has other responsibilities that punctuate his routine. Sometimes, on less busy afternoons, he must attend meetings of the Collegium Vestiariorum, where reference prices for various services are set and common problems, such as shortages of certain pigments or conflicts with clients who do not pay on time, are discussed. Today, fortunately, he has no such meeting, but he remembers that in 3 days there will be a gathering, and that he needs to prepare a report on his stocks of purple and other dye substances. The Roman authorities maintain a constant interest in regulating craftsmen, whether through taxes or by setting limits on product quality or price in order to avoid fraud. If a Vestiarius were to offer a fake pigment, claiming it was authentic purple, he would risk severe sanctions. Therefore, Lucius remains aware that honesty and reputation are as important as skill in his trade. After hours of effort, Lucius finally completes dyeing the purple gown. He carefully stretches it on a wooden frame to dry, watching closely to ensure that no uneven spots appear. Meanwhile, the senator's toga has been bleached and is now in the final finishing stage. His apprentice prepares ribbons and edges so that everything is perfectly straight. Before the sun disappears completely, a slave sent by the senator arrives to collect the garments. He checks the material, gives his final approval, and leaves a small purse of coins as partial payment, with the rest due once the senator declares himself satisfied. Lucius escorts him to the door, politely expressing thanks and ensuring that the package is transported properly. Word about the quality or flaws in a Vestiarius's work travels quickly in high circles, and Lucius can afford no mistakes. After locking up the workshop, Lucius heads home, tired but pleased with the day's progress. Along the way, the sun has already set, and the streets gradually quiet. Torches and oil lamps begin to light the intersections, and the occasional hurried citizen returns from the forum. Lucius stops briefly at a small market, where he buys some fruit and a cheap wineskin for dinner. Once in the courtyard of his home, he is greeted by his wife, who has prepared a simple meal, lentils with herbs and a piece of salted fish. Their child, brimming with curiosity, rushes to embrace him and ask about his day. Lucius removes his sandals, feeling the fatigue in his feet, and sits on a wooden chair, grateful for the chance to rest. The family spends a few precious moments together, discussing what happened in the neighborhood, the small bits of news, and plans for the following day. Once in the courtyard of his home, he is greeted by his wife, who has prepared a simple meal, lentils with herbs and a piece of salted fish. Their child, brimming with curiosity, rushes to embrace him and ask about his day. Lucius removes his sandals, feeling the fatigue in his feet, and sits on a wooden chair, grateful for the chance to rest. The family spends a few precious moments together, discussing what happened in the neighborhood, the small bits of news, and plans for the following day. If the day began in the hush of dawn, it ends now in another hush, the hush of night. In this moment, the family can enjoy closeness and a small measure of relaxation. His wife asks Lucius about new clients and negotiated prices, for the household budget depends on the workshop's income. Sometimes she assists him with administrative tasks, keeping track of payments and debts, or even managing the inventory of raw materials. Although women in ancient Rome did not always have equal rights, in many modest families, their contribution was essential to the success of the business. Their son, Fascinated by colors and fabrics, dreams of becoming a Vestiarius as well. Yet Lucius patiently explains that first he must learn to read, to do sums, and to be prepared for physical effort and painstaking work. It is a good opportunity to teach him the basic lessons of how the world works. Nobility, poverty, and human ambitions are all reflected in the clothes people wear. When the family withdraws, Lucius remains for a few moments at the small window. He looks toward the inner courtyard, where moonlight reflects on the stone walls. He thinks about the next day, the purple gown he must finish, the new orders he must fulfill, and the possibility of expanding his business. Perhaps one day he will save enough to rent a larger space, hire more apprentices, and become one of the most respected vestiarii in the district. His reflections are not merely practical. He also remembers Rome's legacy, the power of this city that stretches across seas and lands. No matter how great the military conquests may be, Rome's image also rests on the shoulders of those like him, who create and maintain the visual symbols of Roman authority and refinement. A well-crafted toga can impress an audience in the Senate, and a quality tunic can define the status of a learned merchant. Lucius smiles at the thought that, through his trade, he leaves a subtle mark on the city's history. Roman society is known for its complex structure and for the respect given to those who do their work skillfully. Over the centuries, Roman clothing, especially the toga, has become an instantly recognizable symbol of ancient civilization. The work of vestiari, although less documented than the deeds of great generals or the speeches of great orators, is equally vital for understanding everyday life in the Roman Empire. Through his craft, Lucius stands in a long tradition of artisans who have contributed to Rome's splendor. Every dyed tunic, every adjusted piece of fabric, every meticulously executed embroidery tells a story of wealth, power, and identity. Centuries later, the ruins of forums and amphitheaters will remain standing, while frescoes and statues will portray gods and emperors clad in imposing garments. Beneath those layers of history lie the tireless efforts of countless vestiari, who made possible the distinct Roman fashion we know. Thus concludes a day in the life of Lucius Vestiarius, one filled with errands, effort, social interactions, and moments of introspection. From the first prayer uttered at dawn to the last glance cast at the moon before sleep, the life of a Vestiarius reveals a universe in which craft is woven together with power, fashion with politics, and the daily routine with the grand vision of Rome. It was a day in which white cloths turned into senators' togas, and rare pigments gave rise to purple hues meant to captivate the city's elite. It was also a day in which the craftsman's family enjoyed his support and love, and the community benefited from his products and expertise. In these seemingly ordinary hours lies, in fact, the essence of Rome: discipline, innovation, and respect for tradition. Looking at the scope of this civilization, we can recognize that beyond the fame of generals and emperors stands also the discreet work of those who give life to clothing and visual symbols. Without the efforts of vestiari, Rome would not have possessed the same charm or the same strength of representation. And so, as the curtain of night falls over the cobblestone streets and magnificent temples, we cannot help but think of the multitude of trades that enabled the eternal city to endure in our collective imagination. Here, then, is a window into an ancient world, yet one that remains alive in history and story. Tomorrow we'll find Lucius once again in the workshop, performing the same familiar gestures and with the same passion. From a humble space crowded with fabrics all the way to the bustling forums, from the simple attire of ordinary citizens to the purple of the nobles, the Vestiarius remains a vital node of Roman society, a bridge between ordinary people, protective gods, and the pride of an empire at the height of its splendor. And we who watch from the present are witnesses to a tradition that transcends time, inviting us to reflect on our own trades and on the legacy we leave behind.